First, I would like to welcome, of course, Jose and Maria, as I said before, and all of you who are spending your Saturday, or maybe if you are from Australia, already Sunday, with coffee and pie. And the topic today is the topic of kafir. Kafir, the Islamic term of the kafir. Maybe one more thing before we start. If you have any question, there is a button down for all the live participants, which is called question answers. You can click there and write your questions if you have any, and we'll try to cover as many as we can. Okay, so maybe we can start with you've seen all of the picture what we sent in the invitation, and actually this term kafir steered a lot of interest in the last 1 or 2 weeks, specifically because the Secretary of Defense of the United States of America had a tattoo with the term kafir in Arabic on his arm. And it actually caused a lot of responses from the Islamic organizations as well, from different communities. It was very interesting to observe what will be said about this specific word. But we wanted to speak about this a little bit more in the context. And it's actually good to explain first. Many of you, of course, know because you are following us for a long time. But let's get to the basics. What is kafir? Who is kafir? Who are the Kafirs? So if I may ask Jose to start and kick it off with some kind of basic explanation before we go into questions.
Very gladly. Thank you. Hello, everybody. Kafir is an incredibly important word. Sometimes people use the word, kafir refers to non-Muslim, essentially. And let's also be clear that now what we're talking about is kafir as it's used in Islamic doctrine. Because we can also, we're not here to get into all the potential roots of all Arabic words. This would take forever and we probably wouldn't be the people to do it. But what we can do is just say, how are these words, and in this case, the word kafir, how is it used in Islamic doctrine? In Islamic doctrine, it is used to refer to non-Muslims or to anyone or anything non-Islamic. So it can be that different people use different words when they speak English. They say something like infidel or non-believers or something like this. But kafir, it's important, we believe, to use this word for several reasons. First of all, that is the word that is used in Islamic doctrine. If you want to check, you will see that this kfr root word, which you make kafir with it. This is used 345 times in the Quran. And all the translations of it, it means non-Muslims. Some different words are used in different translations, but it means non-Muslims, right? So that's the first thing. We use it because it's in Islamic doctrine. So that's the first point. Second point is it's absolutely not neutral. So in many ways, to say non-Muslim or unbeliever or disbelievers, things like this, it doesn't make the point of what kafir is. Kafirs are, according to Islamic doctrine, hated by Allah, and they are the worst of all creatures. So you can go for Quran 40:35. That Kafirs are greatly hateful in the sight of Allah. This is just one example. Also, Kafirs are the worst of all creatures. Quran 98:6. They are the worst of created beings. Again, related to Kafirs. So, first of all, it's in the doctrine. Then second, it's not a neutral word, and it's an extremely negative word. And that's very important to remember. And so if you use a more non-Muslims or disbeliever, non-believer, something like this, you're not capturing the essence of how negative that word is. It's a very bad word. And then the third thing I would say about what kafir is that you can do a lot of bad things to kafirs. So you can, from the perspective of Islamic doctrine, what should be done to kafirs you can do a lot of things. So you can kill the kafir, you can mock the kafir, crucify, murder, rape, behead, generally make war on the kafir, and that's what jihad is. So a lot of negative things can be done. And from the perspective of Islamic doctrine, I mean, there's 51% of Islamic doctrine that we define as political Islam, right? Which is about what you can do to the Kafir, right? In this 51%, there's a lot of bad stuff that you can do to the Kafir, or even should, right? Because it's Islamic doctrine makes it a communal obligation and says that this must be done. Muhammad himself said, I have been commanded to fight against the Kafirs until they capitulate, they submit, right? So from all of this, you see that a lot of bad things can and should be done to the Kafirs from the perspective of Islamic doctrine. So they're the three things that I think are incredibly important. First of all, it's in the doctrine. Second, it's a very bad word. And third, you can do a lot of and should do a lot of bad things to the Kafir. And that's a lot of what we're talking about here when we speak about political Islam.
So maybe a question can be, I would like to clarify that question and ask specifically Maria about this. The question would be that in the Islamic doctrine, there is a category which is called people of the book, and this is usually argumentation that not all the people are the Kafirs who are non-Muslims. So what would you say to that? I think it's very important to define it because it's usually taken as an argument that people of the book are not the Kafirs or is a specific category.
Yeah. Let's go into that because it's important, because people of the book, so usually it's defined as Jews and Christians because they also have a religion which is based on a book, and it's called Al-Kitab, and it's the word, as Joe already mentioned, it's the word for the Kafir, according to Jews and Christians, according to the people of the book. And it's very important to know that in the Surah 9:29, it's about the submission of Christians and Jews. And it's important to know that because you all know that one of the most successful strategy for political Islam to be spread and to increase and to get to power in non-Islamic countries is the dhimis, is the status of Jews and Christians under Islamic rule. And I think there was also a question about the Crusades, and let's go into that because it shows how non-Islamic countries are transformed into Islamic ones based on the submission of Jews and Christians under Islamic rule. So Al-Kitab, Kafir. Let's go into that. So when the Holy Land was occupied by a small group of Islamic ruling, it was a Christian country under Islamic ruling, and it came a time, and it was 1000 past Christ, but it was 400 years constantly attacked by political Islam, a Christian country. And when it came 1000 past Christ, the Christian population was under Islamic rule. They always say they could no longer visit the holy places. They were subjected to constant looting, to kidnapping. There were a lot of children kidnapped, and they had to pay ransom payments, a huge amount of ransom payments. And then there was a Caliph al-Hakim who came 1000 past Christ. He destroyed 30,000 churches. The land was expropriated from the Christians and sold to the Muslims. It was told like that. And then it came after a very long time of constant discrimination of the Christians in these countries, Christians and Jews in these countries. It came to Emperor Alexius, who issued a call for help to Rome. And the European Christians then came to aid of the Oriental Christians. And this was the period which is called the Crusades. It took 200 years. And if you compare to the attack of political Islam before that happened and after it happened, then it seems that it was a time of defense. And because Milan mentioned the tattoo of the Secretary of Defense of the United States, which was, I think it was also written Deus Vult, and this was the call of the Crusaders to come for help for their brothers and sisters in this area. So I think it does say a lot if someone has it as a tattoo on on his arm, because it means that he has understood the threat of political Islam, and he is also seeing the need of defense, and he's seeing the need to resist to this threat nowadays. And of course, we are not in a military struggle at the moment, so it's ideological strategy and tactics of political Islam. And the answer also has to be ideologically. So that's why we are here. We want to give the tool in the hands of the people, what they have to do in knowing what is the cause, why is the situation critical at the moment with political Islam, and maybe this just to round it up.
That's an interesting point what you made, because people usually don't know that the Crusades were the response of the military suppression and ideological suppression of the Christians and the Jews in the Middle East for hundreds of years. So many times it's happening that people are exchanging what was the cause and what was the effect. But first was the military jihad and the strong influence of political Islam, and then the Crusades started. So it is not now to speak about the Crusades as such. It's an interesting history, but because it was displayed as a symbolism on the arm of the US Secretary of Defense, it's good to speak about this. What could be the context? Of course, now we don't know the motivation. We have not spoke to him. Maybe some of you can. And if you can, then it would be good to ask. And if you have any kind of statement from him, why he did it and what is behind story, would be actually good, or the background story. But at the same time, it's interesting to see that, because it's not usually known so much. We usually, and one more thing, what we suggest, is to use the English transcription, the Kafir with the capital K, and the same with the plural. So to use the Kafirs as a plural, not kufar, which is sometimes used. So using the English transcription, maybe Joe could say more to that, why we're doing it like this.
Regarding the transliterated Quran, yeah, it's a way that you can very easily check. You can essentially put side by side. You can put English or original Arabic and then the Arabic transcription, so that you can read it easily. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you and me can read it without knowing Arabic. And then there's this KFR root. Yeah, so you can make kafir, kufar. This, in any case, that's the same thing. So you can pluralize it, use it in different ways, but it's the KFR word. It's kafir, and then you can just very easily, so that anyone can check. Yeah. So, and then you can just compare the verses, and you can say, here it says. Often in some Quran translations, you'll see the term disbeliever or something like this, because they do translate it from the Arabic. So if you translate it, disbeliever, unbeliever, something like this, and you'll be able to check and say, kafir, kafir, kafir. So then you can see that happens 345 times in the Quran, so that if someone says, hey, that's not what it means, well, you can say, well, yes, it does. And this is what it says 345 times. So it's useful to have that. I just wanted to mention something, because Maria was mentioning right at the beginning this surah, this, and the 929, I think, and then she mentioned a lot of history regarding the state of the Christians in the history of the Middle East and the many jihad battles. And I wanted to also mention something. So what does 929 say, by the way? Fight against the people of the book, right? It just says fight against them. But then also you can go into the hadith, and what did Muhammad do? So in hadith, okay, the numbers can get long sometimes, right? So it's Muslim hadith 1767a. And Muhammad says, I will expel the Jews and Christians from the Arabian Peninsula and will not leave any but Muslim. So that's very clear. It's totally unequivocal. Yeah, what should happen from the perspective of Islamic doctrine, and it's not some verse that you can give or take. It's also, I mean, it's also the example of Muhammad, who is, according to Islamic doctrine, the perfect example. So what was Muhammad doing? He was saying you should fight against the Christians and Jews. You should ensure that not a single one is left in Arabia. And also, I mean, Bukhari Hadith 2926. The hour will not be established until you fight with the Jews, and the stone behind which a Jew will be hiding will say, "O Muslim, there is a Jew hiding behind me, so kill him." So there are many examples of these kinds of verses or hadiths. So if you ever wonder, what's the attitude, you can just look at some of these, or you can look at the example of Muhammad, who spent a lot of his time making jihad, a lot of it against Jews, because those are the people who were around. Those were the tribes and civilizations that were around at that time. So it was, it's totally clear.
Maybe I can interrupt you. I think I know that the audience is knowledgeable here, but let's give the Surah 929 because it's so important in times like that. And maybe we go a little bit in this treaty of Umar. So what
I wanted to ask you
Caliph,
exactly this. I want to ask you exactly on this.
Yeah, because that's what is. So we go in the primary doctrine and we connect it with what is happening now in front of our doors and in the world. And I think this is one of the most important things. And political Islamic authorities speak about that a lot. So the Surah 929, which is the submission of Jews and Christians, says, "Fight those who believe not in Allah, nor the last day, nor hold that forbidden which had forbidden by Allah and his messenger." So all those who do not submit under the Islamic law, the Sharia, nor acknowledge the religion of the truth, of course, Islam, even if they are of the people of the book, until they pay the jizya with willing submission and feel themselves subdued. So what does it mean to feel themselves subdued? The second caliph after Muhammad's death, Umar, he made this treaty of Umar, which is called Shurut Umar, how Jews and Christians under Islamic law have to submit under the Islamic ruling. They have to pay the jizya tax, which is, according to the power of political Islam, all these discriminations are adapted to the strengths of political Islam. Dhimmis are not allowed to build new churches and monasteries. They have to give food and accommodation to Muslims. They are not allowed to manifest their religion in public. They have to wear recognizable clothing. In that time, it was the Christians blue and the Jews yellow. They are not allowed to carry weapons. They are not allowed to sell alcohol. There is no criticism of Muhammad. And maybe that's important. Maybe we can go into that a little bit because it's also connected to our work, what we do and why we do it like we do it, because criticism of Muhammad, which is connected to the blasphemy laws, which are now transferred into the fighting Islamophobia and racism. So that's a very important topic to understand. Let's go into that a little bit later. And then, of course, there is the prohibition to teach the Quran to non-Islamic children. What does it mean? The non-Muslim should not be involved in the debate about Islam as such. And we know that because most of our audience doesn't know anything about Islam. Please, if you are in the audience, ask among your friends simple questions. Maybe a question, we all know that Ramadan passed, Ramadan is finished now, and everybody was talking about Ramadan, and ask the people if they know why Ramadan was celebrated in the Islamic world. And most of the people won't give an answer because the non-Muslim should not be involved in the debate about this topic. And then there are lots of other rules of non-Muslims how to behave under Islamic rule. And this Shurut Umu, this Treaty of Ummah, is for sure one of the most successful strategies of political Islam to transform the countries. And at the beginning, we were talking about the communities, so the Islamic communities who get more and more power in the non-Islamic countries. And of course, this has something to do with this, with this separation of Muslims and Kafirs. And there's one set of rules for Kafirs, the other set of rules for Muslims. And this area, when political Islam is powerful and dominant in a city, in a street, in a land, in a state, which is called Dar al Islam. So you are all familiar with these terms, I guess. Dar al Islam. It's the area when political Islam has the power, versus the Dar al Harb, which is called the country which is not finally Islamized yet, which is called the land of war, when political Islam has to improve or increase their power and their strengths.
Thank you
Maybe
so much.
so far, yeah.
I would now go into the questions. I would like to say last thing before we go to the questions, and just because you said you sent a lot of the questions before this podcast, so thank you all for this. There's one more thing that what people may ask, but wait, okay? You say kefir is hated, kefir is Kafirs should be raped, Kafirs should be waged war upon, and so on and so on. But if I'm going to Dubai, or I'm taking an Islamic airline, state Islamic airline, if I'm coming to visit Egypt for a vacation, some of the people are coming and saying, but it was one of the best times of my life with the courtesy I got. So that's usually raising an eyebrow and confusion, and then people say, yeah, but you said. So you said this is in the doctrine, that how it is possible that I can go to Egypt and just survive the trip from the airport to the hotel. I mean, that maybe is the question in the minds of the people. So it would be great if we can answer to that, and I will give the word to Joe. And then let's go into, if all of us agree, we can go into questions. This is always very spontaneous. We are not making any long prep. We usually are meeting like 5-10 minutes before this podcast and speaking like what will be the direction we will speak about. So it's always very spontaneous. So Jose, please.
Well, first of all, Islamic doctrine does have this very interesting thing called dualism, which means that it is possible, according to Islamic doctrine, to hold for two contradicting things to be true at the same time. It's often very difficult for us to somehow hold this logic in our minds, but it means that all of those things that we were saying before about what you can do to the kafir, all these negative things, they're true. That's true. You can, and also in context, generally speaking, what Islamic doctrine says is that those things can and should happen, and that's a big bulk of what political Islam is.
And it's a vision also. That's where it goes, right? The idea of the Islamic political vision.
Yes, and nevertheless, there are you can find a verse about how you can leave the kafir alone. Yeah, or in different contexts. So it could be that you let them be, or there is one particular verse I'm thinking of right now where Allah says, leave the Kafirs be for a while, in the context of they are plotting a scheme against you, Muhammad, so I plot a scheme against them. So there are different ways in which you can leave the kafir alone, or say, there's one, you have your religion, I have mine, or these different things that you can just sort of, okay, well, let's just agree to disagree, or something like this. You can find that, but you can also find all of these other things about all the violence that you can.
Which one is valid? Which one is valid?
Yeah, that's the thing. Both are valid. Both are true. Now there's a whole topic of abrogation, which probably many of you know about, but I don't think it's really it's necessarily worth getting into in this moment. Abrogation, and there isn't a better word in the English language, but abrogation in the Islamic context means that something that came chronologically later, so in the life of Muhammad, or what came later, if it's on the same topic, it abrogates something that came earlier. And in the context of Islamic doctrine, it means if Muhammad said, do this, and then later he says, do something else on the same topic, the later one is better and stronger. But the earlier one is still true because, of course, everything in the Quran, everything that Muhammad did and said is perfect. So you can't get rid of it, but you can say the later one is better or stronger. So, but it doesn't solve the question of which one is true. They're both still true. Now, so with that as the background, understanding that, you could potentially, if you can do this, but also do this to the Kafir, you can do both. Okay. With that as the background, now we say, what happens in the world, generally speaking, is everyone a through and through, is every Muslim a through and through jihadi, as per the example of Muhammad and as per political Islam? Well, apparently not. Apparently not everyone is doing this according to what Muhammad said and did. And not everyone is fully, even entire Islamic states are not fully implementing the full political Islam and the full everything that Muhammad did and said. Some places get closer than others.
Islamic State was very close to
Right.
experiencing Muhammad's life in 21st century.
Exactly. That's a very good example. And the thing is, people often use this word extremism or extremists or Islamists, something like that. What you see in something like Islamic State is a group of people who are very much looking at Islamic doctrine and saying, okay, Muhammad was a jihadi. He said to kill the Kafir and to expand Islamic political power by any means necessary, and that's what we will do. But of course, there are many, many other approaches, and there are many other ways of expanding Islamic political power. And you can also say that something like other organizations like Muslim Brotherhood work in different ways, and they work much more with slowly appeasing or educating or converting people to their way of thinking in some way, or spreading their influence in some way. So as we see over history that violent jihad is used less and less, and jihad of the word, jihad of the pen, the jihad of, let's say, information, controlling the informational space, economy, through halal, through the halal certification system, through Islamic banking, all these things, they're very prevalent these days. And so it's also worth bearing in mind that a lot of things are happening in the background at the same time. Yeah.
Okay. The last thing I would like to say, it just popped in my mind, is that, but wait, somebody can say, you don't see that yesterday somebody in Afghanistan planted a bomb and killed somebody in a mosque, and it was actually from the Islamic community, people killing some other people in the Islamic community. The same was done by Islamic State. It contradicts to what you are saying, because it seems like, it's some kind of extremism which is aimed not only on Kafirs, what you say, but it's also aimed on the people from Islamic community. It also has an answer. And the answer is that why it is happening that the Islamic State itself killed, I think, definitely more people from the Islamic community, more Muslims than non-Muslims, while being active in the Middle East. And the reason is because some group from the Islamic community evaluated, based on the example of Muhammad, another group from the Islamic community not being Islamic enough, and then starts so-called jihad of purification to get rid of the Kafirs, who actually became out of the Islamic community itself. So this is heartbreaking story, because then you can see that the first victims of the Islamic doctrine itself and the political Islamic doctrine is the Islamic community, are the Muslims. because they actually are dying because somebody else evaluated them as Kafirs, while they may not perceive themselves as Kafirs. So this is a really heartbreaking thing, and that's why you can see so much violence also in the Islamic countries. Yep.
If I may, there's a question here which is right on this topic. Is there such a thing as a person who believes they're Muslim, who can pick and choose which commands and beliefs of Muhammad's they want and still be a true Muslim, or are they considered a kafir in Muhammad's eyes, and thus worthy of being killed as well? Well, exactly. A person can, of course, pick and choose whatever they want, but Islamic doctrine is Islamic doctrine. It just is what it is, and so you can practice it more or less fully. Now, who decides if you're whatever a true Muslim would be, or a kafir, or whatever? And the answer is, well, again, I would say Islamic doctrine is Islamic doctrine, and it doesn't give you a choice. Also, you don't get a choice of you can choose this or that. And because it simply, it is what it is, and Muhammad was totally clear. His example is totally clear. And also, practically speaking, it's extremely dangerous. And someone who chooses to not be Islamic enough may find themselves in a situation where another member of the Islamic community decides.
And Muhammad is the example, right? It's important to understand that he is the picture to focus on.
Yeah, and if according to that you're not Islamic enough, you may also be considered a kafir, and the punishment for being a kafir or being an apostate of Islam, not necessarily a self-declared, I'm leaving apostate, but just not Islamic enough, as in the example that Milan was mentioning of Islamic State killing a lot of other Muslims. Well, the punishment would be death. So it's an extremely dangerous game to pick and choose.
Thank you so much. Let's go into questions. Okay, Maria, please.
No, yeah, maybe I just add, because I think it's important to understand, because we never talk about the individuals, about the Muslims. Why don't we talk about them? Because we could evaluate this one is moderate or liberal or things like that. But that's not, as Joe said, that's not part of the game. There is the Islamic doctrine, and there is a principle which is called al-wala wal-bara. That means that there is no free will at all, neither spiritual nor political, nor in any way. According to the Islamic teachings, there is no freedom. Yeah, you can submit to Muhammad and Allah and obey to the rules, or you are not a true or a good, or you are not submitted to the rules of Muhammad and Allah, and then you get punished. That's why everything in political Islam, or in Islam as such, everything is built up on fear. You have to behave to the rules, to submit to Muhammad and Allah. There is a Quran Surah 2:216, which says fighting is prescribed for you and you dislike it, but it is possible that you dislike a thing which is good for you, and that you love a thing which is bad for you. So everything is based on the will of Allah and of his messenger, who is Muhammad. And that's maybe important to know. That's why we don't speak about individuals. So we speak about the doctrine, and if the doctrine is applied. And yeah, there are 57 Islamic countries. They are more or less, some of these countries are not so Islamized than others, but the direction is clear. That the direction is to be submitted to Muhammad and Allah in its fullness, in Sharia in its fullness. And to go there is dualistic, as we have heard. There are some levels of Islamization, but it's not that you can choose. It's according to the Islamic political power, you are more or less submitted to this doctrine. That's maybe important to know. There is nothing about choosing or free will or can I do this or that. The teaching is clear.
If you doubt the Islamic political vision, the final Islamic political vision, you can go to the OIC website, OIC, which is the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. connecting all of those Islamic countries. This is one of the strongest groups in the UN, actually. And you can look on the logo. We spoke about this already in one of the previous podcasts, but look on the OIC logo. It's interesting to see. And you can immediately see what is the final Islamic political vision. It's actually displayed there on that logo.
It's also good to note that the Declaration of Human Rights that OIC countries sign is different to the one that most other countries sign. Most countries sign the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So then if you define what human rights are, then for many countries around the world, that's what it means. It means what is in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. That's what most of us think human rights are. But according to the OIC, they sign the Cairo Declaration of Human Rights. Now, this was updated some years ago. There is an older one and there's a newer one, but they're both very similar. Some of the wording changed.
Yep.
But essentially, they both say the same thing, which is that the ultimate authority is Islamic doctrine. And Sharia was explicitly mentioned in the previous declaration and in the more modern declaration, the revision. Sharia is not explicitly mentioned, I believe, but anyway, it says that the foundation should be Islamic doctrine. And it is, of course, the same thing. Sharia, just the legal kind of workings out of how to put Quran, Sirah, and Hadith into a legal system. So that's very instructive. Because if you understand what Islamic doctrine is and that human rights therefore should be based in those countries in Islamic doctrine, and we're talking now about what should happen to the Kafir, right? That means it's absolutely in the I'm not sure if to say in the constitutions, but definitely in the legal workings of those countries. What they mean by human rights is everything that we're saying about what should be done to the Kafir, everything that we know from the last podcast, perhaps about what should be done to women. I mean, it's really something to declare that, and to sign that kind of declaration. We should also know that.
Yeah.
Let's now go in.
Thank you. Just to add something, thank you, Joe, for mentioning the Cairo Declaration of Human Rights. And please, the audience, you should be aware that what we study in the primary doctrine, Sirah, Hadith, and Quran, is also laid down in the recent Islamic treaties and documents. So we have to study the Cairo Declaration, and there is the ISESCO, the strategy for Islamic cultural action outside the Islamic world. So that's a guideline how the Islamic community should behave in non-Islamic countries to live their culture and to adapt their culture so not to adapt to the non-Islamic culture, but to make them superior to the host society. So we have to study all these documents. And then there is the UN resolution, which is the International Day to Fight Islamophobia, which outlines the fact that the non-Muslim should not be involved in the debate on Islam. That's why the authorities are put in our countries. That's why we have all the Islamic organizations who take over the debate over Islam and political Islam. And of course, we should be aware that political Islam wants, in the modern recent times, wants to subvert the fields of education, the field of economy, and the field of finance. That's Joe already mentioned it. That's the jihad of the money and the jihad of the word and the pen. So all these modern hybrid strategies and tools of political Islam are connected to the primary doctrine and are laid down in recent documents, which are important to study.
Let's now do, because I think we covered a lot of what was in the questions. We read them before, so I think that many of the things were covered. But Joe, if you have still some of the questions what we got ahead, which we could ask, I would definitely like to come to the Texas situation shortly, but maybe in the end of the podcast, because that's just, but it's connected, of course, to the Kafir. Everything is connected to the Kafir in political Islam.
Yeah, I got two things to mention or about the kafir and questions that were asked. First, first is how to correctly pronounce kafir. Well, we're doing our best. I think we can choose. Yeah, it's perfectly reasonable to say kafir, and plural can also be kafirs or whatever makes sense. However you pluralize in your country. I don't think we should get too bogged down with it. The important thing is that it's in Islamic doctrine, and then if you pronounce it poorly, it's not the end of the world.
But use the term kafir. Don't use the term non-Muslim. The reason is because maybe if you start to explain it, but mention the term kafir because it's not a neutral term, while term non-Muslim, it's a neutral term. So it's important to say the term kafir because it always raises the question, what is a kafir? Who is a kafir? And then you can explain.
Maybe I can quickly do some sharing of one experience, and I think you will experience the same if you are in the debate with some Islamic people. So if you're in the debate and you use the term kafir, for sure, they will the representatives of political Islam, they will claim you to play with this term. You will play in the hands of the extremists. That's very much according to the Islamic doctrine to push back our work in saying so. So you have to be aware that they will do that, and then of course you can say whatever you feel, whatever you do. We go back to the authorities, to Muhammad and Allah, and we trust to the doctrine and not to what you say. Just that you're aware that that will come.
Another question was actually I'd never thought about it. The term kafir must be declared hate speech. Yeah, this is an interesting point. Now, I mean, we can all debate about whether hate speech laws should exist or not exist. But if they exist, then to be consistent, kafir, I mean, definitely would fall under the worst, most offensive words, which are absolutely about extreme hate and an incitation, like they incite violence. Yeah, because what should be done to the kafir? Well, all the things that we've mentioned already. So it's a very negative word. It incites violence and it identifies a particular group of people for all of those things, including genocide, I mean, you could make a very strong case, which I think we've made already. Islamic doctrine makes the case for itself. That it's a very bad word that includes all of these things, that it targets specific people. And so you could very much make the point that if you're going to have hate speech laws, that's a word that should be included.
There is actually statement from CAIR, which is one of the most prominent United States Islamic organizations. And actually there is a statement specifically to the tattoo of the kafir. So I will just quote the first part. There are 3 paragraphs, I will say the first one. Tattooing the Arabic word kafir, which essentially refers to a person who knowingly conceals or denies fundamental divine truth on his body, is a sign of both anti-Muslim hostility and personal insecurity. So that was said by executive director of CAIR. Interesting, isn't it? That's actually what Maria was speaking about exactly. But if you know the term the kafir, you know what the kafir means and actually how negative it is, how it's actually harmful to so many people. So many people died because of political Islam. You can very boldly go out there and speak about this and it's like, wait a second. Yeah, there is a kafir, the term I know, and actually we should even speak more about that and a certain symbolism in that it's important to mention. So.
Yeah, practically speaking, I agree that we should keep using the word kafir to make people aware of it. I guess the issue would not be so much with using the word kafir as I don't know exactly the usage or the ideology of holding a kafir, what a kafir is, what should be done to the kafir. That ideology should certainly be considered from all sides, including including the law, including constitutions, is that something that we're okay with?
Another question, Jose?
There is maybe I can pick. There is a question or a statement on interreligious dialogue, and as I studied, or as we studied in the last times, also the project, the strategy paper of Muslim Brotherhood. So all the clergy, all the priests and church leaders should be aware that they are target of political Islam to go through the dawah, so through the propaganda for Islam, through the invitation to Islam. And this is happening for many, many years now in Europe. So it started, I would say, 30 years ago, or at least 20 years ago. It started that representatives of political Islam, they approached our clergy. And of course, as the organizations were already established and the debate was completely led by the Islamic authorities, these clergy and church leaders, they were not aware about the Islamic teachings at all. And this was the trap. And I call it we, because everybody fell in this trap that we were not able to go into the teachings, because this is Islamic ideology, Islamic doctrine, that the Kafir should not be involved in the debate. So we were completely we were completely blank to go in this dialogue, interfaith dialogue, which is called dawah from the Islamic side, and which is clearly defined in the project, in the strategy paper of Muslim Brotherhood, how it should be. There is even a 70 pages guideline of the methodology of the dawah, how the da'i, the Islamic representative, should invite the non-Muslim, the kafir, the clergy, the leaders, the politicians, to accept Islam, to support Islamic authorities, to give money to Islamic authorities, to do all these things, what happened now. And the only thing what we can do is there is a very good moment, and I really want to encourage you, the audience here. It's a very good moment. The world is waking up a little bit, because the jihad of the word and the speech, and also unluckily acts of violent jihad are increasing a lot. Violence against women and all those things, stabbings and all those things are increasing a lot. So the people start to connect political Islamic ideology to what is happening. So it's a very good moment to approach these people and to give them the knowledge what they lack. And I have very good experience with that. I speak a lot to clergy, to priests, and I have to say that they start to understand, and hopefully they will change their attitude towards political Islam step by step.
Yeah, there was a question about leaders and educating leaders to the true nature of political Islam. And yeah, I think this is a very important point. To whatever degree we can connect with different kinds of with everyone. But if you can have in your sites, whoever in your community, or politicians or community leaders or whoever has a position of influence in any way, they should absolutely know. They should know, and a great place to start is with political Islam and Kafir. Actually, I think that's the base of any conversation. Once you have managed to establish in any conversation that there is such a thing as political Islam, and that there is such a thing as Kafir, it's already a success. And using these words is very useful, because you keep using the word political Islam, and someone says, okay, but you keep using this word political Islam, what does it mean? If you haven't defined it already, here's your opportunity. It's the 51% of Islamic doctrine that's about how to treat the kafir. And what's the kafir? Kafir is the non-Muslim, but wait a moment. Yeah, the kafir is not a neutral word, and a lot of terrible things can be done to kafirs. So that is kind of a paint by numbers start of any conversation, I think. Once you've established that, you're already on a good... You can't go forward until you've established those things. Political Islam, 51% about how to treat the kafir and what the kafir is. Once you got that, it's a good start.
Would it be possible still to go back to this question what we read before the podcast started? It was about the situation in Texas right now.
Yes, there are two questions regarding Texas. First of all, there's some proposed Texas legislation to require school districts to provide a halal food option. And then there's another one which is about building mega cities in the USA, such as the proposed Epic City in Texas.
So I will say only quickly a few words to that. It's a typical strategy. You can see that. You can see it now on a small scale. It is still a small scale because the big scale is, for example, Pakistan and India. You know, I mean, Pakistan was eventually some centuries ago also in India, and it became Pakistan quite actually recently. So why that happened? Because it first started with an enclave, and any city like this potentially is a first enclave because then can be also Sharia law implemented partially or fully, because there will be no control over that specifically. And it's actually happening. You could see that in European countries and European cities, that Sharia courts are being implemented, etc. So it is important to understand that always it starts with an enclave. First, there is a hijra, which is the Islamic political migration. And then it comes to specifically building an enclaves, and that you can call it Islamic separatism. The idea is to, of course, taking over the territory. Political Islam has the idea. And the doctrinal idea is to get the territory under the Islamic influence, to submit to Muhammad and Allah. So yeah, this is definitely one of the strategies. You can see it in Kosovo. You can see it in many Islamic countries. All of the Islamic countries were not Islamic. So 2000 years ago, we had no Islamic countries in the world. How that happened that we have Islamic countries now? Many times it was through the kinetic war, which was led from the Islamic armies against the non-Islamic territories, but also many times it started with enclaves. So it is a very clear strategy how to dominate the territory. It was an interesting news article that in one of the cities in Sweden, there are no more problems, because there are many problems with specifically one of the Islamic enclaves. And there are no more problems, but it was very clear from the article itself that the problems stopped. It was unspoken, but it was very clear the way how it was written, because there were no Kafirs anymore in those enclaves. So they became very orderly and they became very peaceful because it became fully Islamic. So it's interesting.
That's the final Islamic political vision, right? That's the word peace in Islamic doctrine means that that's when all the Kafirs had, the whole world has submitted to Muhammad and Allah. Now, this is just a micro version of it, right? But the peace comes finally in principle when the job is done and everything has become Islamic.
But somebody will say, but we have Chinese district in New York, we have Italian district in New York, we have this and that district, many European districts in different big mega cities. So what's the problem with an Islamic district? What's the problem with the Islamic district if I'm having it in one specific city? And again, we are coming back to the idea, and actually Maria can speak more about this, what's happening in Europe. We have still a few minutes, but the idea is that an Islamic district in a specific territory, you have to understand the ideology which is being kept by the organizational infrastructure, and the ideology is the domination of the whole territory of the land. Yeah, so that's the difference, because if you have a specific territory which you can label like it can be cultural or societal or ideological, but this specific territory which we could label Islamic in any of the megacities or in the countries, kept by the organizational infrastructure with a goal which is written in the political Islam, is very clear, which is the domination, submission to Muhammad and Allah. So it's a first step to the Islamization process. Actually, not the first step, it's actually the second, maybe, or third, establishing such a unit. Enclave, I think that's the best word to use.
I think it's the time we are facing in a lot of areas in Europe now. It's this second level of establishing the Islamic organization and the second stage of Islamization process, which you could connect to the Hijra, the Islamic migration from Mecca to Medina, and then Mohammed started to implement his laws, his political power, and that's where we are now. And how does it work? It's very easy to measure how far Sharia law is already established in our countries. You can measure it. So the politicians are influenced a lot, clergy and politicians are influenced a lot. The Islamic authorities always claim of victimhood. So the Muslims are always the victims of whatever. There is always a reason why they can be seen as a victim. I think we explained that in many podcasts before, that according to the Islamic teachings, the Muslim is always the victim and the non-Muslim, the Kafir, is the perpetrator, is the aggressor. And then they start the demands for halal food, for prayer rooms, for prayer times, for schools, for the implementation of Islamic finance tools, halal certification, Sharia banking, Waqf, all those things. You can measure how far Sharia is established in your area if you look at that. So if your child goes in a school and they serve halal food, all the Islamic children in the school have not got the choice anymore to eat non-halal food, because you have to obey to the Sharia law. You have to consume halal food. And of course, for non-Muslims, at one point, it's easier to serve only halal food because it's easier to organize and it's cheaper. And that's how political Islam is dominant in an area. And then, of course, the fighting everybody who is going in this topic and talking about political Islam, it's put down by the law of fighting Islamophobia. So that's how, and I think we are in this stage of jihad at the moment in Europe, that the political Islamic power is established and gets more and more impact in non-Islamic countries. And that could be, like Milan described, in a fully Islamized area or street, or where the Sharia has taken over. From this area, political Islam is increasing and making their submission, subverting the non-Islamic areas and try to submit the Kafirs to political Islam, to the Islamic rules, to Sharia.
It's a territorial ideological conquest. That's what it is. But also we all have to understand the focal point of that are the Islamic organizations themselves. Because when we spoke already before, imagine the situation that you have Islamic migration, Islamic political migration to a non-Islamic territory. What choice has the person who came from an Islamic country to a non-Islamic one, when they would like to get integrated and have the job, to actually say, and you know what's in the Islamic doctrine, if you would be perceived, as we spoke before, as a kafir, you could be killed. So we have today in the United States, in Europe, in the whole world, in non-Islamic countries, books and literature being distributed, which allows someone to be killed for apostasy, for leaving the political system of Islam. So I think we first should look into re-evaluating what actually Islam is, looking into political Islam itself, recategorizing it and understanding it that the people needs to be given the choice, and it's not possible then in non-Islamic countries it's being distributed, implemented and looked upon to the Islamic doctrine specifically, which claims the possibility for people to be killed for leaving the system. So I think the first thing to be really human beings, to understand that everybody is a human being, is to help to all the people who are coming to have a free choice. And Islamic organizations make sure, this whole infrastructure, that there is not much free choice. So something like witness protection programs for people who would like to leave the system should be established. We are waiting for a long time, something like that to happen. That would be actually wonderful.
And to also not allow the existing, or not allow these structures to be created in the first place. Yeah, because if we understand that the money from halal certification goes to political Islam and even specifically jihad, and even violent jihad, you would say, okay, well, we can't have this, right? And if we understood that any Islamic organization, just by the fact of being Islamic, what does being Islamic mean? Well, it's based on Quran, Sirah, and Hadith. Well, 51% of that is about how to treat the Kafir, and a lot of that is, what we've already mentioned. You can kill, you can so on and so on. Then you say, okay, well, Islamic organizations may be a problem, right? It may not be okay to allow Islamic organizations to be created, to flourish, and so on. Even mosques themselves are power centers where there can be war chambers, and we actually have a report on mosque and many different uses of the mosque, where you can store weapons, etc., etc., make legal judgments, or all kinds of things. So we have to really look, and as Milan said, understand what Islam is, understand that it doesn't fit the category of religion, understand that political Islam is very harmful to the Kafir, and simply not allow the Islamic organizations that represent it to function in such a way that they can, first of all, allow this totally different Islamic community to be created around those rules, around those things that are harmful to the Kafir, and then to ultimately destroy the Kafir. It's
As a CSPI, I would like to say one more thing, that we deeply disagree and we are against the division of the society into Kafirs and Muslims. That's done by the Islamic doctrine itself. What we're doing, we are describing it, and there is one humanity. Unfortunately, Islamic doctrine created the category of Kafirs, which has a totally different rights and can be done with them what everything Jose and Maria explained. So as a CSPI, we believe that there is a unity between the humans, and that division which is brought into the society by the Islamic political doctrine, it's heartbreaking.
Absolutely.
Yeah, maybe for me to finish this hour is finished. Just as a last word, maybe next time we could go a little bit more in what can we do. And there is this Islamic Darura principle, which says that necessity overcomes obligation. Maybe I would love to talk a bit more about that, because if we want to secure the freedom and the choice and the free will of the people, then we have to implement the Islamic principle of the Darura, which makes it possible that Muslims in a country where the Sharia is not applied can have the choice, because of this principle, necessity overcomes obligation. But let's go into that next time.
Thank you so much. So we will publish this podcast as soon as possible on our streaming platforms. We will start with that right now. It was one of the questions. It's also a question connected to why we if we don't would like to show our faces, we are happy to do so. We just, had no capacity you see us, hopefully you see us, to have no capacity to publish all the previous podcasts so quickly, but you can go to our YouTube channel, to any other of our channels, and you can see us having usually lectures, but we will start to publish this podcast. We are promising it for a long time, with no specific promise, but we wanting it. It was a wishful thinking. So right now, I think that we are closing the subject. Jose, any closing words from you?
Thank you all. And just to remind you that not only will we keep doing these, but also if you're interested in somehow supporting the activity, there are options for doing that, including applying to join CSPI, donating to CSPII, generally, of course, using the methods, how to speak about it, this knowledge, and sharing it with others. This is also wonderful. Yeah, just please consider what you can do.
100% of the money, if you will decide to donate, will be used for our activity, because we do not pay anyone who is in any way active in CSPII. So all the money goes directly into the education, research, activities, operational expenses. So thank you for this if you decide to do so.